Welcome to the Sports Business Take podcast with Zach Creekmore and Paul High. We flipped it on you, but now we're both wearing Christmas hats. So here we are, ready to go again. How you doing, Paul?
Great, man. So we didn't plan to do 2 episodes today, but those of you who watch our channel will know that we did 2 episodes today because I'm wearing the same hat, same stuff. We actually just decided to yap for 50 minutes about basically what we've been doing and what our goals for 2025 are, which I actually really enjoyed.
Same
But
here.
we then realized, like, wait, we're almost an hour in and we haven't even talked about the 2 topics that we were going to talk about today. So we should probably make 2 episodes. So this is, I guess, episode 2 or part 2 of today's recording. But definitely had a lot of fun in the last one. Go check that out. That'll be on our YouTube channel by the time this is released for sure. And yeah, ready to talk about Netflix and pro tennis. So
Yeah,
let's
come
start
on.
with, obviously, since we're wearing Christmas hats, you all know it was the holidays recently. Netflix had 2 NFL games on their channel. This is the second year that they've done it, but they drew 65 million viewers on Christmas between the 2 games, which is a huge number because that's an NFL streaming record. What happened was the Ravens Texans posted a 24.3 million average minute audience, and the Chiefs versus the Steelers put up a 24.1 million average minute audience. So the previous record was 22.8 among streaming services. Still a little bit down from what they got in viewership last year from the regular broadcasting channels. Actually, sorry, this was the first year Netflix did this, not the second year. Second year that the NFL's had Christmas games. First year that Netflix has done it. But last year they did it on broadcast TV, which did a little bit better, but not that much better. So I think this is a big deal for Netflix because it shows that they can attract a broadcast TV size audience in a streaming platform, which wasn't previously proved for them specifically before. So when you saw kind of the numbers and everything that I just laid out, what were your first thoughts? What were your reactions to this? How does this affect streaming going forward?
Well, I think the question is, how does it affect streaming going forward, right? Well said. We're really in a space where it's interesting. Sports media is changing. As much as it is an ever-changing thing, it's changing drastically in the last, I guess, really 6 months, where we're growing. And Netflix seeing success here is massive and super exciting, but it's not the first time we've seen streaming done for professional sports. Thursday Night Football is on streaming every week. So it's really like Netflix is a late adopter to streaming sports services, which is really kind of odd and weird for Netflix.
Kind of ironic, right? Because they were really the first one to get into streaming, and then they're kind of the last one to get into sports live.
Exactly. So really what Netflix usually is what we would define as an industry innovator in the streaming space, but now we're defining them as somebody who's late to the game, but doing it better than everybody else. Now, I think they did really well, and what really made this stand out is they made it a unique and special experience, effectively because it was Christmas. They were able to really target, okay, this is going to be really special. We want to make this really big, really loud, invest a lot of money into it. And that's what wins people over. So
just ask you a question based off of what you just said. Do you think that if it was a non-Christmas game, if it was a regular game, that they wouldn't do as well? Because that was kind of the implication to me of what you just laid out.
I agree. So that is my number one thought of realistically, they made this game very special and invested a lot of money in halftime show, etc. that wouldn't normally be present in an every week game because it was a special event, right? You're able to really target a different audience where you're not only targeting the classic or usual NFL fan, but you're targeting both the holidays NFL fan because people are having their family over and a husband has his mother-in-law at his house and he really doesn't want to talk to her, so he just puts on the football game. You got those people, which is honestly a crazy statement from me, not to attack people, but
no. This is the classic American way. You put on sports to entertain your family during the holidays. That's a an American pastime in its own. Usually for football, it's reserved for Thanksgiving until the last couple years. So
exactly.
I guess they're kind of taking advantage of the newness of having that viewing option when you have all your people over. And it's funny, you think about I think what people don't realize when they look at like 65 million viewers, right? That's the number, right? But that also was kind of the number of devices, not the number of actual people. Because if you think about it, you have to assume a very large percentage of those were watching with their family of, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 plus people. So the amount of viewership that they were able to draw was actually astronomically better than a broadcast television game on Christmas last year, and completely blows any streaming of a regular NFL game out of the water. If you think of it in that way, it's hard to quantify that because we don't have the exact number, because that's, I guess, unknown, right? And I guess part of the thing, we'll get into this a little bit later, is the international is unknown as well. Like, the 65 million was only U.S. viewers. So you factor in international as well as the people that were watching on the same TV, and it's like, wow, they did really good, in terms of attracting an audience.
Absolutely. Well, I think they did very well, right? This is where Netflix shines, or where they can shine at times of they made the product unique and they were able to attack a multifaceted audience, which isn't just the traditional NFL viewer, but also the holiday viewer, and additionally, the person who's like, ooh, I really like Beyonce. So you got all of those points hit where you're getting somebody who's a big name who's going to draw people in. You're getting a timing piece right while you're also getting the traditional audience, because people want to watch their favorite sports all the time, and even on holidays, right? It's something that brings people together, and that's what is beautiful about sports. Netflix really attacked that and did really well here. The question kind of goes to, do we see Netflix become a regular in this space? Do we see Netflix become somebody who the rest of the industry fears in this space?
That's
Paul,
right.
your thoughts before mine.
Yeah, so I want to, before I answer that question, and I do want to get into that, you glossed over a little bit Beyonce. So she was the halftime show, obviously, but what I want to emphasize about that was the most watched part of the entire broadcast of either game, right? Beyonce had 28 million people watching her during that halftime show. And I'm thinking to myself, like, this is a Christmas Day game, not the Super Bowl. And Netflix is doing not better, but about equal to a Super Bowl halftime show in a regular season game. This isn't a playoff game. This, like, there were some playoff implications, sure, but a regular season game. They put on an amazing halftime show, and it makes you think, well, yeah, they spent a lot of money to do it, but the NFL could do halftime shows more often now. Like, having seen this as a success, the halftime show, I think, will become a staple of special event games to come in the next several years. And I really think that was part of what made their broadcast entertaining, was having that big performer, which arguably could top some of the halftime shows from the Super Bowls in the last few years. So I guess what I wanted to ask you was, straight up, do you think this was a better halftime show with Beyonce than in the last couple Super Bowls with, like, I don't know, The Weeknd?
I'm going to say I'm a horrible person. I didn't watch it.
I didn't watch the halftime show either because we were eating, but
I didn't even watch the game.
oh, okay.
This is my Christmas Day. This is back to the personal. I was with my parents in the morning, and I was with my girlfriend's family in the afternoon, but the TV was not on for my day.
Okay, fair enough. I mean, that's, everybody has.
I trust Beyonce's quality of work. I'm confident it was beautiful.
Yeah. She was a good performer. I saw, like, the first few minutes of it, but then we were eating, so yeah. But I thought them having a good halftime show really brought up their viewership numbers for sure. Even though it was less viewers than last Christmas's audience on the broadcast TV, I don't really think that matters because they proved a lot doing this. When they tried to stream the Jake Paul versus Mike Tyson fight a couple months ago, they had a lot of buggy issues, a lot of tech issues. People couldn't see it as well, or the streaming didn't work for them. So I think them proving that they can put on an event like this, or actually two events like this, and have it work smoothly, I think that's a big step for them going forward. And to answer your question, if I'm their competitors, if I'm Hulu, because Hulu does streaming of live sports, not NFL specifically, but live sports nonetheless. Amazon Prime, if I'm Peacock, I'm terrified right now. I am absolutely terrified because Netflix not dominates, but they're clearly above everybody else in that space. And I think that's a pretty well-known fact in that industry and in the media industry, that Netflix is the king of streaming. When you think of streaming, you think of a lot of Netflix original shows, even. And if they can add their brand to live sports or live sports to their brand, if it becomes synonymous, I think their competitors may be completely blown out of the water because most people, or a lot of people, don't have the money to afford every single streaming service, or simply want to be smart with their finances and think we cannot do that and justify that action of having like 7 streaming services. Netflix has live sports now. Yeah, why don't we just pay for that in YouTube TV and be done with it? And we don't need anything else. So if I'm their competitors, I'm terrified because this influence of having this go off really well, and the coming 2 years that Netflix will be doing NFL games on Christmas, is going to influence other leagues to trust Netflix to do their broadcasts as well. And once that starts happening and Netflix starts raking in the money for live sports, if I'm Hulu, if I'm Amazon Prime and I'm relying on live sports streaming as one of my revenue generation streams, I'm pretty scared right now.
Absolutely. And I think you got the really important point that this is live sports specific. Because Netflix really hasn't focused on the live sports space, they may have focused on they focused on the documentaries, but they haven't gone in the live sports space at all, right? So that has left that as a real revenue generator and a real reason that people buy Peacock, people buy Hulu,
right.
people buy ESPN Plus, people buy Paramount
YouTube
Plus,
TV.
right? YouTube TV. Those are reasons. Like the reason I have Paramount Plus is because of the Champions League. The reason I have Peacock is because of the Prem, right? If you see those types of things start to gravitate towards Netflix and Netflix secure those types of contracts, that's going to be a massive revenue generator for them.
It completely changes the entire media market. If this trend continues and they keep getting more live sports contracts, it completely changes the entire media market. Not only does it affect streaming, but it also affects broadcast television now too, because now broadcast television is saying, oh crap, we're not even getting the contracts for the live games. What the hell do we do now? Like, how can we compete with Netflix when you need only Netflix to watch live sports? When this gets to this point where you need Netflix to watch live sports and you're streaming and that's it, and you don't need broadcast TV anymore, who's going to need broadcast TV anymore? A lot of people have broadcast television to watch sports specifically here in America, right? That is the reason broadcast television, honestly, that and the news are the 2 reasons broadcast television is still alive at all in this streaming market. You take one of those 2 major things away by adding Netflix into this picture. Like, obviously we're projecting a few years down the road here, but I'm scared as hell if I'm broadcast television right now, and I'm scared as hell if I'm Hulu, Amazon Prime, Peacock, etc.
Absolutely. I would say I might not be scared as hell because part of the thought for me,
at least nervous.
Right, definitely nervous, right? Part of the thought for me is that the reason that those streaming services secure more sports contracts is because they have a direct alignment with a traditional broadcasting service, right? So Hulu with ESPN, and then I forget which one is with Paramount, but you get what I mean. Peacock has NBC, right? Those things are directly connected, which means they're getting a double header with both the broadcasting and the streaming services.
Yeah, so CBS did help Netflix produce this, by the way.
Correct, which is exactly what I'm getting at, to the point where if Netflix was to directly partner with CBS and you see them not merge, but see more frequent partnerships with them, right? A synergy, that's when I would be really afraid, right? If I was that's when, as another streaming competitor, I would be really afraid because now Netflix is getting into the world where they're not producing, but they are aligning themselves with somebody who's a top competitor or a top performer in the broadcasting space, and realistically are going to be able to put the news on their platform, put more live sports content on their platform, and really succeed.
Yeah.
Right.
Obviously, this is just the first domino to fall, but it's a very important domino in the scenario that we're talking about. So that's why this is such a big deal. I guess it's less about the number of actual viewers that they got and more about what that number could mean for them and could mean for the entire sports media landscape going forward.
Absolutely. And I think that's really what it is. This is going to be does Netflix come back to being king? Because in my opinion, Netflix has been on a bit of a decline in the last couple of years, while they've seen their competitors grow and kind of come into the space where it's a bit more competitive. If Netflix really attacks this and does this more often, you can really see them come back to being come back to being on the Iron Throne. Maybe Game of Thrones. I don't know.
No, definitely. I think we've kind of talked about this is a trend that I think personally will continue in the future. I think more leagues are going to follow the NFL in wanting to sign up with Netflix now that they've seen that they can do it. But I think another part of this that we haven't even talked about yet is it's creating, if you're business-wise, it's creating an entirely new revenue stream for your company. Netflix doesn't really get much ad revenue, right? Because many of their subscribers are ad-free subscriptions. So you don't get the ads when you're watching the content. But now these live sports games have ads, so that's baked into the package, and now you're getting ad revenue from companies that are paying to be on your stream, and you didn't have that before. You just completely created an entirely new and pretty significant revenue stream for yourself as a media company that you hadn't even tapped into before. So that accumulation of resources is another thing that adds on to, I guess, their power grab, as you were kind of mentioning, their claim to the Iron Throne of top streamer. I do think that this is a very important domino to fall in terms of their climb to be not only the top streamer, but maybe the top media company. And listen, I know I'm projecting too far out, and maybe I'm being a little bit dramatic, but it really does show a lot that this went off so well, and I think that's why we're talking about it. I think it's funny. A lot of the articles that I read focused on the numbers specifically, and not maybe the implications of those numbers, and that's why we're talking about this now. Is I think the implications of those numbers is much more interesting for what it could mean. Not only we're not a business podcast, but we talk about sports leagues, right? So we don't talk about Netflix and Amazon and let's say Apple all that much, but it gets very relevant when they start putting themselves in spaces to be synergetic with sports. And that's what they've done here and positioned themselves to do that for a while. I mean, they have the next 2 years to continue proving that their NFL games are going to go off as well, if not better than this year.
Absolutely. And I think really the crop that Netflix needs to produce here is a clear percentage increase year on year where they are showing growth in this area, and they're really going to be able to but really going to be able to explode into this new area or into this new section of their business. And I think that is something that Netflix really needs to invest in if they want to be top.
Yeah.
So, and that's what we're seeing them do here. So I think, right, obviously, kudos Netflix, great work.
And listen, I said their competitors should be scared as hell, but let's think about it realistically. Like you said, Hulu has the backing of ESPN. ESPN has the backing of Disney. So they have a safety net to fall back on, even if they lose out some competition to Netflix in that regard. And Amazon is one of the biggest 3 companies in the world, right? So Amazon Prime, which is where you watch, the NFL Thursday night games, has that to fall back on as well. So it's not like other companies won't have the same resources or equal resources, but it is more like you're adding one more big fish into a pond full of already big fish, and who's going to come out on top. I think that's why this conversation is very interesting in the next 5-10 years going forward.
Agreed. It's gonna be a really, really, really interesting contest, and we're excited to see it. Right. I hope we're talking about growth in these areas for these media companies, and they push each other, right? Because we love a good competition, which is why we're a bit capitalistic sometimes, right? We're here for a good competition, right? We want to see people challenge each other, businesses challenge each other to be better, and this is what I see Netflix doing for the entire streaming world in this case. So super excited to see more.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, that pretty much wraps up my thoughts on that. Let's talk about tennis, man. So, first of all, I didn't know that there wasn't a guaranteed minimum for every player in tennis. I just kind of assumed that was a baseline for pretty much every professional sport. but I had no idea. You having been at the U.S. Open for the last month or so of summer, did you hear any rumblings about this, about inserting a minimum? Well, they started it this year, so this would have been the first year that it happened. But did you hear players talking about it? Did you hear people around the facility talking about how well it was working, or what they could have changed, or how it was going to play out going forward?
This is not something that I specifically heard about at the U.S. Open, but I do remember hearing players frequently discuss after matches how this is impacting their earnings, how refereeing decision directly impacts their earnings. So if you don't know much about tennis, tennis is obviously a super competitive sport, but with it being an individual sport, it is like your earning is solely based on your performance in tournaments and how far you go, right? So
Much
if
less
you're
about guaranteed contracts.
exactly, right? So it's not like you have a team you're signed to where you're directly making money and you have this guaranteed because you've signed a contract, right? You might get that from a media contract or partnership that you have, but outside of that, you are your own business, right? You are your own team, right? Driving your own revenue through media, through tournament success, right? So Francis Tiafoe, his performance in the US Open earned him like $1+ million, right? That's serious money, right? But if he was to go to the next round, he's earning 2.3 if he made it to the final, right? So that's a big increase. But effectively, you have the people, and how we're going to go into how the US Open is structured a bit, right? You have however many people that go to the qualifiers. You make a US Open qualifier, there's very little guaranteed money there, right? You're challenging to make the tournament. And if you make past the qualifiers, you make 100 grand, right? That's serious money, but you have to be one of the top performers. But there's very little that is guaranteed. Now, obviously there's guaranteed money, but not enough that this can be consistently your sole job, right? So the world of tennis, especially during the qualifiers, it can be really, really harsh with your finances. It's challenging.
It's a lot earned, that's for sure.
Absolutely.
So what we're referring to, if you guys don't know, I didn't before I read this article and before Zach brought this story to my attention, was they inserted a program last year called Baseline, which gave $1.3 million this past year to 26 players in 2024. That essentially was like a minimum salary or a guaranteed salary for where they ranked among tennis players in the world. So this basically guarantees money for the top 250 players in the sport, at least from my understanding of the program. You can feel free to fact check me on that, but I believe that's what it is. And so I think this is a huge step for tennis. I think we see a lot of times in other sports having a minimum guaranteed salary, like a league minimum, is huge in terms of being able to attract talent. And I think makes also a lot more incentive for players to want to play in that league because they know that they will be taken care of no matter what. And I think some of the interesting numbers can be broken down a little bit in terms of, they're increasing to 200,000 this year for players ranked 100 to 176 or 101 to 176, and 100,000 for players ranked 176 to 250. So I wanted to ask you, do you have any idea why it's a specific top 250 player cutoff? Do you think it should be a shorter cutoff? Like, should it be the top 100 players or 200 players, or do you think it should be more?
So based on my understanding, and I'm not going to say I'm a tennis expert, and effectively we're talking about a whole new topic here, but the way the tennis world works is you make the ATP Pro Tour, which is effectively like you being in the big time, but I believe that's the top 250. Okay. So this benefit is something made by the ATP. So to be reaping the benefit of it, you have to make the ATP Pro Tour. So my understanding is that. Now, it makes sense, yes, but also there's also a lot of people who are competing in tennis who are between that 500 and 250 that won't reap this benefit. And I'd really like to see the ATP kind of expand this program where it's going to support more athletes who are trying to maybe drive themselves into success, but also that's something that's really hard to do and something that when you don't have a direct connection to that athlete, difficult. But I'd like to see this kind of be a concept that's really supported and grown. because it really enables athletes to not only feel secure in themselves, but also really build a team around them that is going to help them succeed and grow, which will therefore make the sport more competitive, make tennis more entertaining, and help them to drive viewership and other things. Because obviously, as you support your talent, the more the talent is going to want to engage with you, the more the talent is going to produce a better product for you, the more they're going to do in terms of media, in terms of promotion, and the more you're going to be able to produce and the more you're going to be able to earn based on effectively your talent's interaction with your product.
Yeah, I really couldn't have put it better myself. So let's talk about basically what this is built on and what this program is about. We talked a lot about the financials and why they're doing it, but it's based on three big pillars of baseline. This program is a minimum guarantee, which we already talked about, income protection, which we already hit on, and newcomer investment. So I thought this one was very interesting to me, and it kind of touches on honestly what you were just talking about them expanding to maybe some of the people that are on their way up or trying to increase from maybe the top 500 to the top 250. So the newcomer investment supports players who have broken into the top 125 for the first time. So to me, this is a really good incentive for athletes and their work ethic to be like, oh, I'm going to make more money if I'm in the top 125. Like I have more guaranteed chances to make a good salary if I do that. So I think this will increase the competitiveness for sure.
Oh, absolutely. Well, I think tennis already is super competitive and people are always driving. The higher spot you are, you want to be a higher ranking because it gets you into more tournaments and it gets you paid more because you're naturally going to get into the first round of tournaments rather than having to play the qualifiers, which is a really, really big deal for a lot of these characters. But at the same time, you also are going to be really challenged where people sometimes get injured and they fall in the rankings and they get hurt. And this is what guarantees, right? The emotional and mental anguish of not being able to play your sport is enough. When it directly impacts your ability to make money and your ability to support your family, the mental and emotional anguish behind that is immense. So this is
the income pillar that supports players that are coming back from injury and are returning to the tour. And I think so they've kind of covered, I guess you could say, a good amount of areas where a player would need to be protected with a guaranteed salary.
Exactly. Right. So these are players being supported, whether they're going through a really tough time emotionally or really tough time physically. And at the same time, they're also supporting athletes who are trying to drive themselves to get to that higher ranking and really make earning. Whether it's a young guy like, I don't know, we could give a João Fonseca, who obviously is really entertaining and really new to the sport, young, and is driving himself into it. So we could see these people really reap the benefits where they're going to be better able to support themselves and better able to break into that top 25. Top 50, right? And make the sport more competitive. So I think this is great from the ATP. I think more individualistic sports should have stuff like this. And I'm not sure if they do, but I think of track, I think of swimming, and you see people who like compete professionally in cross country. Obviously, cross country isn't a heavily watched sport, but there's not really guaranteed money. You're solely working on the earning you make, and you're traveling the world trying to do something you love. And unless you're really driving your own money through having another job or through social media, you're going to have a really hard time.
Yeah, it's it's a lot of sponsors. It comes from a lot of sponsorship and being willing to kind of invest in yourself and trust in the process, which is a really hard thing to do. Having no guarantees, having the unknown, and I think this solves that problem for a lot of tennis players. So I really like this program for them, and I'm glad that they're continuing to increase the minimum benefits that these players are getting. This is what ATP chairman Andrea Gaudenzi, I hope I'm not butchering that, had to say about this. Baseline is a game changer for the economics of a tennis player. We're giving players the financial support they need to overcome challenges and build a sustainable career, whether they're navigating injuries, setbacks in performance, or entering the tour for the first time. So I think that really captures everything that we've talked about with why they've done it and why it's going to be so beneficial.
Absolutely. And I really think the truest fact is we want to see professional sports organizations protect, promote, and really realistically help their athletes become the best that they can be, right? That's going to benefit their product. It's going to benefit the athlete. It's going to benefit their relationships and benefit that long term, right? And we really want to see that be the interaction between organization and athlete and see that be really healthy. And I really wanted to highlight this because the ATP clearly does a really good job of that and really is promoting athlete safety and health. And congratulations to them. That's why they're an industry leader in this, and something they should be very proud about.
Yeah, absolutely. So we've talked about it in a positive light mostly, but I do want to ask the question that's kind of been on my mind when I saw this was, how have they not had this before? Like, why did it take so long to get this implemented? I'm not a big professional tennis follower, so do you have any idea? You followed a little bit more than I do. Why it's taken this long to implement kind of a minimum salary for these guys?
Well, I think they've had a minimum salary in place. I'm not sure since what year. I think they've really started to invest in the program now. Now, it may be correct that this is totally new to them, and if this is totally new, it's solely based on the point that historically tennis has never had it. So why would they ever change something? It's a sport based on a lot of tradition and seeing things change frequently. It's not I guess you could say, a hyper mover. It's a pretty static sport where you have the 4 really big tournaments, and that's what people are drawn to unless you're a really big tennis fan, because you have Roland Garros, you have, which is the French Open, you have Wimbledon, you have the Australian Open, you have the US Open, and that is that's what tennis is all about, winning those Grand Slams. And then obviously you have other tournaments that exist. So I really think that this is something where they're trying to innovate their sport for the better health of the athlete, and athletes are really promoting and advocating for themselves in that manner. So something where they're being really smart, but the fact that this hasn't existed before is kind of sad, but it's something where people based on tradition do not traditionally change.
Yeah. I guess you could say at least they're learning now, like at least they're improving and making steps forward now. And also this really does show that they care about their athletes. Like I think trying to think of not only how can we provide a minimum guaranteed salary to them, but also how can we support them in their comeback from injury and for incentivize kind of better performance and working your way up the league beyond just winning in general. I think that really shows that they care about the growth of the sport as a whole. So congratulations to tennis for having this program, and we hope that baseline goes well going into the new year.
Absolutely.
Do you have any other thoughts on this?
I think the last thought that I do have is when I was at the US Open, probably the highest interaction I have ever seen between direct ATP representatives and professional tennis players, right? They go and these players' psyche, and you're going and you're seeing them after the game and you're checking on them to this extent. Yeah. Where sure, they have a drug test, but I forget who it was, but one of the professional players, I believe it was Casper Ruud, lost, and a representative from the ATP followed and was having a conversation with him about the games, and they actively listened to their athlete. Now, I wouldn't say that Casper was happy with the result. I think he was actually very much complaining and yelling at the guy. But realistically, I wouldn't think an NFL director would be sitting there and going and listening to the complaints of the NFL athletes right after their loss. I don't see that's the interaction that I see from professional sports in other spaces. So I think the ATP does a great job, and really, really happy to be able to highlight them in this episode.
Yeah, for sure. Something we haven't talked about before. Definitely an interesting story.
Hopefully some more tennis.
Yeah. Hope you guys enjoyed it. Have a great New Year's, and I guess we will see you in 2025.
Vamos, 2025! Yay! Woo!